Hi 11s, today we're going to go over your process exemplar for your text intervention. So this is your timeline of events. Weeks 1 to 5 we read the book and then we covered your plot, setting, character, theme and symbolism stuff along with some style work. Then we looked at text intervention genre in week 6. It's drafting in week 7 with your draft due on the Friday, and then your final copy is due at the end of week 8 before you go on block exams on the Friday, the 9th of June. So your task is to write a text intervention by selecting one of the characters from the novel who isn't the narrator. So death isn't an option to be the narrator of your text intervention, and you also can't pick a character who's in their dying moment. So you can pick a character that dies, you just can't choose it in that dying moment. Then you need to convey that event or an event from their perspective. So you need to pick and choose something that you feel could be a gap that needs to be filled, or perhaps a rewrite from that character's perspective that hasn't been explored. For this excerpt that we're looking at, we're going to look at it from Max van den Berg's perspective. So when we're looking at your text interventions, we're looking for a title that is related to your text intervention and it value adds. That could mean it might be some phrases or some words from your text intervention. That's always a good way to do it. A hint is to leave your title till last and then look back through your content and get some inspiration from something that you've written. You then need to follow the structure of an intervention. It needs to have an orientation, rising action, climax, then a resolution. So all of these need to be present in your intervention, and these all needs to be sequenced and logically ordered so that they all flow from each other. You should be referencing other events from the novel. So things that happen that are already stated, you should embed them into your own writing. That could be from the same section if it's a rewrite, but also previous information or perhaps information from further in the novel. You might like to foreshadow something. So foreshadowing is when you're predicting an event before it happens, which happens a lot in the Book Thief. You also need to develop your character in your text intervention. You need to make sure you're using some dialogue in there. Please don't overuse dialogue so that it starts to look like a script, but you also need to make sure it's punctuated correctly. You should be using some clear and precise English throughout with only some use of German words where and when appropriate. So look at words that particular characters use perhaps, or how we address other characters, and anything that's used that it's appropriate you should try and use within your own intervention. You should definitely be using a lot of figurative language to help show, not tell, and we'll go into a bit more detail about that later, but using things like personification, similes, metaphors, onomatopoeia perhaps, to help with your descriptive writing. We also want to see you try and use some irony if and when appropriate. Dramatic irony in the novel is when the audience knows about something but the character doesn't. And then we've also got situational irony, is when the situation or the event doesn't turn out the way it was thought or we planned it to happen. So if you look at your text intervention booklet, there's more details on those in there. So see if you can develop some irony in your text intervention. So if we look at this example here, we have the eradication of Hitler's power. So that is a relevant and value-adding title because throughout this intervention he does refer to Hitler's power, and it's relevant to the content that's discussed throughout. There's a clear orientation that establishes the setting and the character. So straight away in this first paragraph, we should be able to tell who your text intervention's perspective is from. In this case, there's hints at the setting. So the fact that we are in a small room hints that it probably is Max. It also hints at particular events that have already happened. You know, I recalled the starless night, which began my life of guilt and shame because I didn't look back. Okay, that hints at previous events, which makes it clear who the character is. We then also have our complication introduced. So the complication is almost the focus of your text intervention, and it's what your character is trying to deal with and work with, and that builds up to a climax. So in here we can see that there's this clear and precise English, clear and to the point with lots of descriptive language and figurative language. We've got a nice use of simile down here. Shivers tormented my body. I strangled back the tears. All of these are some nice use of figurative language, and lots of descriptive language with lots of adjective use. So once your complication has been introduced, you can give some more details and build on that complication. It doesn't just need to be a short introduced thing. Then there's some events that are going to build up from that complication. And remember, it is just a single point in time though. Try and pick a text intervention that's only going to cover a short period of time. That way you can give as much detail as possible about all of it. Rather than trying to cover a long period of time and you can't really give those really detailed bits of writing. You then need to build to a climax, and this is where, you know, the height of the intervention should be, and you've built up to that moment. Again, we've got lots of use of figurative language throughout here. We've also got some of the German words or book-specific words, so things like the Führer's words, Mein Kampf. We've also got, you know, the reference to Jewish boys and the time period. You can also consider some of the language that the German people use, like Frau or Herr, Huberman, and the insults that they use towards each other, if it fits. Once you've hit your climax, you then need to have a resolution, and this is where we see the emotional outcome for the character. It can link into a new event that's going to happen. You don't have to reveal everything because it is part of the novel, not a short story. But please don't end it with, you know, the typical, oh, and then I woke up, or then he died, because you are not meant to choose someone who's in their dying moments. It really should leave the audience thinking with something about this character. It can have an interesting twist that might link into something else. It might foreshadow something, but it needs to be, it needs to give the audience a sense of finish, basically. Now, when it comes to formatting your intervention, this is a different intervention to the exemplar just shown. Consider how it is formatted in the book and the style of it in the novel. Okay, so we have our page numbers down here.
Yes.
We also have a header up here. That is the title of the book. So if you look in your novel, on that right hand page, the header is always the book thief, the name of the novel, and then on the left hand page, if it's not the start of a chapter, it's the chapter name. Our chapter title is a little bit further down the page here, and it's in capitals. It's slightly bigger than the rest of the text, and it's centered. There's a bit of a gap also between that title and the first paragraph. We also then have this stylized narration that's specific to the book thief. We often refer to these as a little bit of extra narration or a little bit of extra fact that the narrator has added in. They're very factual statements, but you'll notice the formatting of the symbols here, either side, and again how it's laid out in bold and center. So these are all mirroring the style of the novel and the format of the novel, so it's something you should consider as well. So in summary, just remember you need to have that title that's related and value adds. We need to follow the structure. You should be referencing events from the novel, which is why it's important that you've read the whole novel. You need to look at how to punctuate your dialogue correctly, that language that you're using, including clear and precise English, the use of some German words where and when appropriate. Don't just go adding it in for the sake of it. Lots of descriptive language, including figurative language, and if possible, can you pick a situation that might build on some irony? In terms of helping with your writing, you need to look at the 5 criterion of characterization. So you can show your character's personality through a number of ways. So look at how the way that they speak and the words that they say. So there might be specific words that specific characters say, and others wouldn't speak that way, so you need to try and mirror that style. You also need to look at the description of that character's appearance and clothing, and can you bring that out in your own? Will it help you describe them or another character that's in your intervention? Also, descriptions from the novel about that character's innermost thoughts and feelings will help. Comments made about the character by other characters can also help give you an insight into their personality and also their actions. So all of these put together, we should see those coming out in your intervention, and it should develop your character. In terms of showing and not telling, that'll be said to you a lot for this. So telling the story is just recounting what happened, and you can do that with a lot of descriptive language, but often it's still just retelling. So saying something like, when she arrived, she was cold and hungry, that's just telling what happened, you know, and I walked and did this, and then I saw this, and then I did that. I walked over here. That's just telling, it's not actually showing. So when we say showing the story, it is recounting what happened, but along with that, it includes what is seen as it's happening. What could be heard, what could be felt, what could be touched, or what could be smelt. So you need to think about your your senses, and that you're appealing to that, and your audience should be able to visualize it. And this is where your descriptive language come in and your figurative language. So instead of when she arrived, she was cold and hungry, this shows a lot more detail. Upon her arrival, so there, that's recounting what happened. You could still see the bite marks of snow on her hands and the frosty blood on her fingers. Everything about her was undernourished, wire-like shins, coat-hanger arms. She did not produce it easily, but when it came, she had a starving smile. So that really gives insight into what this character looks like, and a little bit of a hint at her personality almost. So if we ever say show, don't tell, we're talking about using those descriptive language devices that'll really give us insight into the senses about, you know, what can be seen, heard, felt, touched, or smelt. So you need to consider all of these things when you're doing your draft, and make sure that you are reading your text intervention booklet in detail to make sure that you've covered all aspects of the task.